Raghav, Anika, and Samir seemed like an ordinary Indian family chasing the American dream, but behind the quiet suburban facade, jealousy, fear, and obsession were quietly building a trap that would turn their lives into a chilling nightmare. Please subscribe for daily new update of crime story and watch till end. Raghav Malhotra and Anika Malhotra arrived in the United States with big hopes and careful plans. They left behind a busy city in India and settled in a quiet American suburb where the streets were clean and the houses looked almost identical. For them, this move was not just about changing countries, but about starting a new version of life. Raghav believed this land would reward hard work, and Anika believed it would give her freedom to grow into her own person. Raghav was in his mid-30s, serious by nature, and deeply focused on stability. He had secured a job as an electrical maintenance supervisor at a manufacturing plant. His work involved long hours, safety checks, and constant responsibility. He took pride in his technical knowledge and liked being seen as someone reliable and intelligent. To him, control meant safety, and safety meant success. He believed that strict planning was the only way to survive in a foreign country. Anika was younger and more open-minded. She had enrolled in an interior design course and spent her free time exploring new ideas. She admired the creativity around her and felt inspired by the independence she saw in others. She shared small moments of her daily life on social media, showing decorated rooms, simple meals, and peaceful corners of their home. For her, America felt like a place where dreams could slowly become real. From the outside, their life seemed balanced. They attended community gatherings, greeted neighbors politely, and followed every rule carefully. Other immigrant families saw them as an example of a couple adjusting well. Their home looked neat and welcoming, filled with carefully chosen furniture and soft lighting. Nothing about their routine suggested danger or darkness. But beneath this calm surface, the pressure of a new life quietly settled in. Raghav felt the weight of expectations every day. Work stress, financial responsibilities, and the fear of failure followed him home. He believed any mistake could cost everything he had built. Anika, on the other hand, began to change. The new environment made her more confident and expressive. She started thinking beyond survival and focused on personal growth. This difference slowly created distance between them. Raghav saw change as risk, while Anika saw it as progress. Though no one noticed it yet, their paths were no longer fully aligned. The house that symbolized their success also became a place where unspoken tension lived quietly. At this early stage, nothing seemed broken. There were no clear signs, no loud conflicts, and no visible warnings. It was simply the beginning of a story that would later shock everyone who believed they knew the truth about their perfect new life. Life in the new country slowly changed the balance between Raghav and Anika. The early excitement of moving abroad began to fade, replaced by routine and pressure. Raghav became more serious with each passing month. His work demanded perfection, and mistakes were not tolerated. He carried that same mindset into his home. Every expense, every decision, and every plan had to follow his approval. What he called responsibility slowly turned into control. Anika noticed these changes clearly. At first, she ignored them, believing stress was the reason. But over time, the restrictions became harder to overlook. Raghav questioned her spending, criticized her time management, and showed discomfort with her growing confidence. He did not like that she was becoming independent in a place where he already felt insecure. The more Anika adapted to her surroundings, the more Raghav felt left behind emotionally. Anika's course exposed her to new ideas and people. She learned about creative freedom, modern lifestyles, and personal choice. This education changed how she saw her future. She began to save small amounts of money from freelance work and scholarships. She quietly planned a short visit back to India. Hopping distance would give her clarity. These plans were never openly discussed, but Raghav sensed a shift. He felt it in her behavior, in her silence, and in the way she seemed less dependent on him. Raghav's fear grew stronger each day. He feared losing control, losing respect, and losing the image of a perfect household he had worked so hard to maintain. In his mind, Anika's independence was not growth, but rebellion. He started monitoring her routines closely. He paid attention to when she left the house, how long she stayed out, and what she did online. This constant observation created a heavy atmosphere inside the home. The house, once a symbol of their success, began to feel suffocating. Anika felt watched even when she was alone. She reduced her online presence and avoided unnecessary activities. The silence between them grew longer, filled with unspoken tension. There were no loud arguments, no public signs of conflict, and nothing that neighbors or friends could point to. Everything remained hidden behind closed doors. Inside Raghav's mind, thoughts became darker. He began convincing himself that he was being threatened. He believed that if Anika left, everything he had built would fall apart. His fear slowly changed into resentment. He stopped seeing her as a partner and began seeing her as a problem that needed to be solved. This shift was silent but dangerous. Anika, unaware of how far Raghav's thoughts had gone, focused on her plans. She believed time and distance could fix what felt broken. She trusted that years of shared history still meant safety. What she did not realize was that Raghav had already crossed a mental line. Control had become his priority, and fear had taken over his reason. The cracks in their relationship were no longer small. They were deep, hidden, and leading toward a future no one could imagine. Raghav's professional life began to influence his personal thoughts in a dangerous way. Every day at work, he dealt with complex electrical systems, safety protocols, and accident reports. He knew how fragile the human body was when exposed to power beyond its limits. He also knew how often electrical incidents were labeled as unfortunate accidents, especially inside homes. Over time, this knowledge stopped being neutral information and slowly turned into something darker in his mind. At home, Raghav started paying close attention to the wiring, switches, and appliances. He noticed things he had ignored before. The fuse box, the grounding system, and the condition of the outlets became objects of quiet observation. What once felt like routine maintenance now felt like opportunity. He told himself he was only checking for safety. But his thoughts went far beyond that excuse. Stress and fear pushed him deeper into isolation. Instead of sharing his worries or seeking help, he kept everything inside. He spent long hours alone, researching electrical failures and accident cases late at night. His search history reflected growing obsession, though he believed he was being careful. He studied how small changes could create serious outcomes and how such outcomes could appear natural. The more he learned, the more confident he became. Raghav began making minor adjustments around the house. These changes were subtle and carefully planned. Nothing looked unusual on the surface. He knew how to avoid obvious signs of damage or forced tampering. He also knew that investigators often trusted accidents involving electricity, especially when the homeowner had technical experience. This belief gave him a false sense of security. Anika remained unaware of these developments. She trusted the home they shared and the man she had built her life with. She focused on her studies and future plans, believing the tension between them was temporary. The house continued to feel familiar to her, even as it slowly transformed into something unsafe. She did not notice the small differences because she had no reason to suspect them. Inside Raghav, guilt and justification battled constantly. He told himself that everything he was thinking was logical. He convinced himself that he was protecting his future, his identity, and his survival. Each justification made the next step easier. What once felt unthinkable now felt possible. He stopped considering consequences and focused only on outcomes. The power he understood so well began to symbolize control. Electricity was invisible, silent, and deadly when misused. To Raghav, it represented a solution that required no confrontation and left no immediate trace. He believed intelligence could outsmart morality. This belief marked the point of no return. As days passed, his planning became more precise. He checked timings, routines, and habits. He observed without emotion. The home remained quiet, and life continued as normal on the outside. But beneath the walls and behind the switches, something had changed forever. The danger was no longer a thought. It was prepared, waiting patiently for the moment Raghav had already decided would come. The day passed like any other, calm and uneventful on the surface. The weather was mild, and the neighborhood followed its usual quiet rhythm. Inside the house, everything looked normal. Lights worked, appliances functioned, and there was nothing that suggested danger. Raghav moved through the space with careful attention, checking small details without drawing notice. His actions were slow and deliberate, shaped by weeks of preparation and silent decisions. As evening approached, the house grew quieter. The outside sounds faded, and the rooms settled into stillness. Raghav appeared composed, following routine movements that showed no emotion. Inside his mind, however, everything felt sharp and focused. He was no longer questioning his choices. Fear had already done its work, and hesitation no longer existed. What mattered now was timing and control. Anika went about her usual routine, trusting the safety of her surroundings. She believed the home was the one place where nothing could go wrong. The familiar environment gave her comfort, even though tension had been present for months. She had no idea that ordinary objects around her were no longer harmless. The danger was hidden in places no one ever thinks to question. The moment arrived without warning. A simple action, repeated countless times before, became fatal. The altered electrical system responded exactly as Raghav had planned. Power surged through a path designed to cause maximum harm in the shortest time. There was no noise loud enough to alert neighbors and no sign of struggle. Everything happened quickly, silently, and out of sight. When it was over, the house returned to stillness. Lights continued to glow softly. The air remained unchanged. Raghav stood alone in a space that looked exactly the same as it had an hour earlier. There were no visible signs of violence. The scene looked like the result of bad luck rather than intention. This was the outcome he had convinced himself was perfect. Raghav took a moment to steady himself. His expression showed shock and concern, carefully shaped for what would come next. He checked the surroundings, making sure nothing appeared disturbed. The modifications he had made were hidden well, exactly as he had intended. To anyone else, the house would tell a simple story of a tragic accident. Emergency services were called soon after. Raghav followed instructions calmly and answered questions without hesitation. His behavior matched what was expected from a grieving husband. The scene offered no reason for suspicion. The system he had trusted worked exactly as he believed it would. As the night continued, the house filled with unfamiliar activity, then slowly emptied again. By the time silence returned, the truth was already buried beneath assumptions and appearances. What had happened was final, and the path ahead seemed clear to Raghav. He believed the danger had passed and that the story would end there. He did not know that this night, which he thought was perfectly planned, had already planted the first seed of his downfall. The official response to the incident was quick and procedural. Authorities treated the scene as a routine household accident, something that sadly happened more often than people realized. The electrical setup appeared normal at first glance, and there were no obvious signs of tampering. The appliance involved was common, and such cases were usually explained by faulty wiring or human error. The conclusion came easily, without resistance. Medical reports stated electrocution as the cause of death. There were no external injuries that suggested violence. The absence of struggle supported the idea of a sudden and unavoidable accident. Everything fit neatly into a familiar pattern. For the system, this was another unfortunate case closed too soon. Raghav followed every step with careful attention. He completed paperwork, answered questions, and accepted formal sympathy with quiet restraint. His behavior seemed appropriate, even admirable, to those observing him. He showed no panic, no confusion, and no contradiction in his statements. This consistency helped reinforce the belief that nothing suspicious had occurred. In the days that followed, arrangements were handled quickly. Cultural rituals were observed respectfully, and legal processes moved forward without delay. The apartment was cleared for continued use after a brief inspection. The wiring was not deeply examined, as there was no reason to believe it should be. The system trusted appearances, and appearances did not fail. Raghav returned to his routine sooner than expected. He went back to work, maintained regular hours, and avoided unnecessary attention. Colleagues expressed sympathy, and supervisors admired his strength. His calm response made people uncomfortable to question anything further. Grief, after all, looked different on everyone. Insurance procedures began soon after. Claims were filed, documents were reviewed, and financial matters were processed. Everything moved smoothly. There were no delays or disputes. The policy details matched the records, and approvals came without resistance. From an administrative point of view, the case was simple. At home, the silence felt different. The house remained unchanged, but its meaning had shifted. Raghav moved through the rooms with caution, as if respecting an invisible boundary. He avoided certain areas without fully understanding why. Though he believed the danger was over, a sense of unease followed him quietly. Friends and community members slowly returned to their own lives. Sympathy faded, and attention moved elsewhere. The story lost relevance, becoming just another tragic incident in a foreign land. Raghav believed this fading interest was proof of success. The past, he thought, had been sealed permanently. A closure can be misleading. While official records were complete and assumptions were accepted, truth does not always disappear with paperwork. Some details remain dormant, waiting for the right moment to surface. Raghav did not realize that one small decision, made in confidence and haste, had created a record that would not stay buried forever. What felt like an ending was only a pause, and beneath the calm surface, the story was far from finished. Time passed, and the incident slowly faded from public memory. For most people, it was an unfortunate accident that no longer required attention. Records were filed, documents archived, and life moved forward. Raghav adjusted to a quieter routine, believing the past was firmly behind him. He avoided thinking about that night, focusing instead on maintaining normalcy. From the outside, everything appeared settled. Several months later, a routine insurance review quietly reopened the file. Such reviews were standard and usually uneventful. Anika's policy was examined again as part of a larger audit, nothing unusual at first glance. However, one detail stood out. The coverage amount had been increased not long before her death. Policy updates close to fatal incidents often triggered closer examination, even when no suspicion existed initially. An insurance investigator was assigned to verify supporting documents. The process was slow and methodical. Financial records, timelines, and signatures were reviewed carefully. The investigator noticed that Raghav had handled most household maintenance himself, including recent electrical work. According to apartment regulations, such work required licensed third-party professionals. This rule violation alone did not prove wrongdoing, but it raised a small question that could not be ignored. The investigator requested additional documentation related to the electrical setup. This led to a deeper look at maintenance logs and inspection notes. It became clear that no official electrician had visited the apartment before the incident. Raghav's technical background made this seem reasonable at first. Still, the lack of independent verification added weight to the growing doubt. A quiet request was made for an expert review of the electrical layout described in the original report. This step was not an accusation, only a precaution. A forensic electrical specialist examined the available data and photographs from the scene. Certain patterns did not align with common household failures. The way current traveled suggested intentional redirection rather than random malfunction. At this point, the matter moved beyond insurance. Authorities were informed of the inconsistencies. The case was not reopened publicly, but internal interest increased. Investigators revisited Raghav's background and professional history. His expertise, once considered harmless, now appeared relevant in a troubling way. Digital records were reviewed next. Internet activity, device usage, and stored data painted a clearer picture. Searches related to electric shock effects, fatal voltage levels, and delayed detection methods appeared repeatedly. The timing of these searches matched the weeks leading up to the incident. What once seemed like coincidence now formed a pattern. Raghav remained unaware of this renewed attention. No one contacted him, and no questions were asked yet. The investigation moved silently, just as the act itself had. Each small discovery added pressure, tightening slowly around a truth that had been hidden for months. What began as a routine review had now become something far more serious. The quiet confidence Raghav had relied on was built on assumptions that no one would look twice. That assumption was no longer valid. Without confrontation or warning, the past he believed was buried had begun to rise, driven by one simple doubt that refused to disappear. The investigation shifted from quiet review to focused reconstruction. Specialists re-examined the apartment in detail, this time with intent rather than assumption. Walls were scanned, outlets tested, and the electrical panel was dismantled piece by piece. What had once looked ordinary now revealed subtle inconsistencies. Wire insulation showed signs of deliberate alteration. Grounding paths were redirected in a way that served no safety purpose. These were not mistakes made by wear or time. They were choices. The forensic electrical report outlined a clear sequence. Current had been guided through a specific route designed to bypass standard protections. Safety breakers that should have tripped remained inactive because they had been neutralized. The changes were precise and efficient, requiring advanced knowledge and careful execution. This level of planning ruled out accident. It also ruled out ignorance. Investigators compared the technical findings with Raghav's professional history. His certifications, training records, and years of experience matched the skill needed to make such alterations. What once explained his confidence now explained the method. The coincidence was no longer defensible. Expertise had crossed into intention. Digital evidence added another layer. Device records showed consistent research into electrical lethality, household accident classification, and investigation thresholds. The timing aligned closely with the period when tensions at home had intensified. Data logs showed activity late at night, repeated visits to technical forums, and saved documents outlining voltage behavior on the human body. None of it was illegal on its own, but together it formed a clear preparation trail. Financial records were analyzed next. Insurance adjustments, beneficiary changes, and timing were mapped against personal events. The increase in coverage appeared strategic rather than coincidental. Investigators noted how administrative actions clustered tightly around moments of domestic strain. Patterns emerged where randomness was once assumed. Authorities expanded the scope to behavioral analysis. Raghav's actions after the incident were reviewed through a new lens. His calmness, once seen as composure, now appeared calculated. The speed with which he returned to routine, the lack of follow-up questions about the electrical fault, and the absence of independent repair requests stood out. Grief does not follow a single pattern, but preparation often does. As evidence accumulated, the case reached a threshold. Warrants were approved, devices were seized, records were secured. The investigation moved from reconstruction to confirmation. Each piece fit without force. There were no contradictions, no gaps requiring imagination. The story told itself through systems, data, and design. When the findings were compiled, the conclusion was unavoidable. The death was not the result of chance or malfunction. It was engineered. The house had been turned into a mechanism, and trust had been used as access. What had been hidden behind routine and expertise was now exposed by the very structure meant to protect. By the time formal charges were prepared, the truth had solidified. The silence that once protected the crime had become its loudest evidence. What remained was not doubt, but the weight of intent laid bare by patience, precision, and the refusal to accept an easy answer. The arrest of Raghav Malhotra sent shockwaves through the quiet neighborhood. Neighbors, friends, and colleagues who had seen him as a calm, competent man struggled to reconcile the image with the reality of the investigation. The truth, once hidden behind normal routines and technical expertise, had finally come to light. What appeared to be a tragic accident was now classified as premeditated murder, and the consequences were immediate and severe. Court proceedings began with meticulous preparation by the prosecution. Every detail uncovered by forensic experts, insurance investigators, and digital analysts was compiled into a narrative that left little room for doubt. Each alteration to the electrical system, every online search related to electrical lethality, and the careful timing of Anika's insurance updates formed a chain of evidence that was difficult to contest. The case became a demonstration of how seemingly ordinary knowledge could be weaponized when fear and control went unchecked. Media coverage followed swiftly. The story of an immigrant couple living a quiet suburban life that ended in a shocking murder captured public attention. Viewers were drawn to the contrast between the peaceful neighborhood and the calculated crime that had taken place behind closed doors. Headlines emphasized the danger of hidden motives and the idea that knowledge, when misused, could become deadly. Experts in law and psychology were invited to comment on the case, explaining how control, obsession, and opportunity often intersect in domestic homicides. Raghav's defense struggled to counter the evidence. Attempts to frame the death as accidental failed against the forensic proof of deliberate alterations and the documented preparation. The digital trail, from late-night searches to planning notes, provided a timeline that matched investigators' reconstructions. Even his professional reputation, which had once served as a shield, now highlighted the premeditation and technical skill required to commit the crime. Throughout the trial, the courtroom remained tense. Witnesses described Raghav's calm demeanor after the incident and the absence of visible conflict at home. Experts explained how carefully engineered electrical failures could appear accidental, emphasizing that Anika's death was no random misfortune. The prosecution emphasized the betrayal of trust, the manipulation of a shared home, the silent planning, and the calculated use of knowledge to end a life. The verdict confirmed what investigators had discovered months earlier. Raghav was found guilty of premeditated murder. Sentencing reflected the severity of the crime and the degree of planning involved. The judgment served as a warning that appearances could be deceiving and that crimes committed behind a veil of normalcy could have devastating consequences. Anika's story, though tragic, became a cautionary tale. It reminded the community and viewers worldwide that domestic violence and manipulation could take forms that left no visible scars. It illustrated how control and fear, when combined with expertise, could turn a home into a dangerous place. Her life, and the manner of her death, highlighted the importance of vigilance, awareness, and the need to question situations that seem superficially calm. The case closed with justice served, but the impact lingered. Raghav's carefully maintained facade had been dismantled by evidence, persistence, and professional expertise. The story remained a stark reminder that silence and appearances could not hide the truth forever. In the end, what was hidden in wires, walls, and unspoken fears had been revealed, ensuring that Anika's life and the crime committed against her would not be forgotten.